was a student at Tony Hoagland's,
Oh,
and I just wondered if during this interview you wanted to, if you had an anecdote or wanted to say anything about Tony, or if you'd rather.
no, that would be fine.
Okay.
He was actually in the first class I ever taught.
Okay. Oh, wow, wow. And I noticed your Kingsley Tufts book. Yes, Horses Where Answers Should Have Been.
Yeah,
had
he wrote
a
it.
blurb.
He did.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
Yes, ex-students are very good at that, writing blurbs.
Somebody ought to come out with a whole book of blurbs. Could you see like an anthology of blurbs? Just
But you know,
with all these
a computer could write them.
yeah.
True.
I hate writing blurbs. I go completely brain dead when I have to write one. In fact, I wrote on Facebook the other day. I announced I wasn't writing any more blurbs, and then immediately got asked to do 2.
Well, you know,
And it was very hard to turn them down.
you know, I'm friends with Michael Heddick,
Mm-hmm.
and when we
He's
saw
wonderful.
that we were going to be interviewing, I said, "Hey, Michael, didn't Chase Twitchell do a blurb for you?" And he said, "Yeah, da 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 da." So, in some sense, blurbs are a good thing, you know. That's it. I thought, okay, good.
Well,
So,
yeah.
Okay, let's get started
So-
then. Greetings. We're here at the Miami Book Fair and pleased to welcome Chase Twitchell.
Who is very happy to be here.
Fantastic, fantastic. She has a new book out, Things as It Is. And I also would like to acknowledge, this is Sally Naylor, Associate Editor at South Florida Poetry Journal, which we affectionately have dubbed SoFloPoJo. Lenny Della Rocca is our editor, and many thanks to poet and tech guy Michael McLamara. Okay. Today we're interviewing Chase Twitchell, who is a pure Zen Yankee handle.
I should never have written that line.
I absolutely love it. We're delighted to have you here today, and I'm wondering if you'd be willing to start with a poem and read us your title poem.
Of course.
Fantastic.
Take me a while to find it. I forget where it is.
134.
Thank you.
she did her homework.
What would I do without you?
All right, so
Things as It Is. I should say something about the title first. Suzuki Roshi was one of the first Zen masters to come, maybe the first, I think, to come to the United States to teach Zen Buddhism. And he had an eccentric use of English, shall we say, for which he was famous. He had a way of saying things so that everyone understood what he meant, but not exactly in English. And things as it is a phrase that he used frequently. And when someone was editing one of his transcripts, they queried him about it and said, "Master, I think you mean things as they are. That would be correct in English." And he said, no. What I meant was things as it is. So I thought that was a great title. Things as it is. Last night my hand began writing in the hand of some future me, as if a branch in wind had scribbled on freshly fallen snow. In the dark, coyotes called back and forth in the bird silence. I put down the pen and went outside, stood listening to wind and snow's translation. Wild dogs, teach me a few of your words before I die.
I particularly love your combining the past, the present, and the future in that first stanza. I don't know. It's marvelous. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Could you tell us a little bit about how Buddhism has informed your work, or just
I
comment?
wish I could answer that question in a sentence or two. It's a really hard question to answer, but I will give it my best shot.
Thank
I
you.
became interested. I was interested in Zen Buddhism when I was in college, and I took a couple of courses in Eastern religions, and I tried meditating by myself. I was fascinated by the idea that the study of one's own mind could yield something other than just the usual yakety yak garbage that tends to come out of it. And I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how to meditate. I'd read some books on it, but I didn't really understand what it was or how to do it. But I was very earnest and tried very hard. And as a result, I had some really scary experiences. I hallucinated a couple of times. It turns out that these little minor hallucinations are called makyo, and they're really nothing. If you want to see one, just meditate for a while and it'll happen. They're little things like you might see flames out of the corner of your eye on the sunlight on the windowsill, or you might see the edge of the carpet rippling a little bit, something like that. And it's really nothing important. The teacher just says, brush it off, keep going. But at the time it scared me because I thought I was going crazy. And so I quit. But many years later, I had finished a book called The Ghost of Eden, which was about the end of the world as we know it. It was an ecological diatribe that I wrote in the 80s. And it was, I think it was the 80s. And the state of our planet, its poor health and our poor stewardship of it has been of great concern to me since I was a kid, because I grew up in the wilderness and saw it get damaged. But anyway, after I finished that book, I felt a kind of stillness and lack of rage and a kind of, maybe you could even call it equanimity, that I associated with what I had read about Buddhism and which I had aspired to come to through meditation. And there was no other comparable state of mind that I'd ever experienced. So I went back and dug all my old Buddha books out of the basement. They were still in boxes, and began to read them again. This was many years later, of course, after my first attempt. And the lights just began to go on. And I realized that there was, in fact, a religion at which I'd always turned up my nose at any idea of organized religion, that seemed to corroborate everything I had discovered for myself in the world. And that quadrupled my interest in it. And then I became quite serious, and my husband kept saying, "You're behaving like a graduate student. Stop reading so many books about Buddhism." And but I persisted, and eventually I went and found a teacher, and have never turned away from it since then. But how it has affected my work, because poems come from the frontier of what you're only just figuring out, I think, if they're any good, and because Zen asks the most profound questions about human life that one can ask, starting with, what is human consciousness? Why are we here? Why do we have consciousness? And what are we supposed to do with it? The practice of Zen meditation has asked me in my poems to be simpler, clearer, to get rid of decoration as much as possible, and to speak only the most essential words. And so I think it has basically put my poems on a pretty strict diet. They got pretty anorexic there for a while. And only now am I beginning to allow a little color and flavor and surface, I hate to say the word decoration, but surface embellishment is maybe a better word, to come back into them, because I think that has a place too. But in general, it's also made me more playful, because the questions that Zen asks are so ridiculous sometimes. Who can ever ask a question? Answer the question, what is human consciousness? Not me, surely.
That explains to me a little why, how you have described poetry as, what was it, graffiti that lasts no longer than perfume. Tremendous playfulness in that, as well as despairiness.
Yeah, that's also kind of a despairing thought. People ask me where I think American poetry is headed, and I have no idea. But it seems to me that with so many people writing it, just the sheer volume of it, and the fact that many people don't even read books anymore, they spend all their time online or looking at TV or the computer screen, And it seems to me that we have to look at the possibility that poetry is going to become as quickly consumed and abandoned as everything else. And so I think that graffiti is actually quite a accurate metaphor for where it's likely to be in the future.
Well, and you certainly have anticipated one of my questions, which was what you may see as the future of contemporary American poetry. Is there any trend in the future that you see that might be positive or?
Well, I think it's very positive that lots of people are reading it and interested in writing it. Less positive to me is the fact that the words don't seem to be expected to be immortal the way they once did, or at least when I was a young poet coming up, everybody wanted to write the immortal words of our century and the words that would be read centuries hence. And it's hard for me to imagine centuries hence, let alone the literature that might come out of them. So that's a sticky question. But recently, I was teaching at Warren Wilson, which is one of those low residency Master of Fine Arts programs, and was astonished and delighted by the quality of the work and the level of ambition. I don't mean ambition for career, but ambition for the works themselves that those students had. And of course, they're mostly older. It's quite a different atmosphere and environment to teach when there are a couple of poets in their 20s and 30s, but most of them are older, have real lives. And the reason they're doing a low residency MFA is because they are older and have real lives and jobs and can't just drop 2 years to go live in Iowa City or Ann Arbor or whatever. And I was very encouraged by the tenacity and stubbornness and dedication of those older but still considering themselves beginner writers. I still consider myself a beginning writer. And I think that that sensibility that one is always a beginner and that writing a poem, no matter what you learn from the poem you just finished, it's useless information for the one you're about to write, because each poem requires that you go back to square one and be stupid again, be ignorant again, be not knowing, and to encounter the world and find something that you want to know, that you need to know, and go after that. And that the writing of poems, therefore, is about teaching oneself something. And when I see that in the young poets, I'm very encouraged, because I think that will survive any changes in language, ecology, whatever. The need to say what it is like to be human, to have human emotions, to have human thoughts, and to figure out what the hell to do with them all.
Yeah, that's terrifically encouraging. Thank you. I read somewhere years ago something about poetry is the attempt to say in words what's impossible to say in words.
Right.
And that is a high standard.
Yes, it is indeed.
Yes.
And of course, it ties right in with Zen, because Zen takes you to a place of no words, where you cannot express certain things in language, which I never believed before. My husband and I call this argument number one, because we don't even have to have the argument anymore. We just refer to it and say, oh, that's argument number one. Let's just skip this conversation. But he really believes that the intellect and language itself can take you to any, and can bring others along with you, to any state of mind or any kind of consciousness, that it should be describable in language, and that if you really are a master of your language, you can get there that way. And also that he puts more faith in the intellect than I do. Maybe that's a male-female thing. I put more faith in a kind of instinctual knowing. But that's argument number one, is that you can get anywhere with your mind and language, and I don't think you can, which is probably why I'm a poet and he's a fiction writer.